Level 2, Lesson 7, The 70-Week Prophecy, God's Last-Ditch Effort to Save Israel, Part 1. We're going to have to do this study in multiple parts because of the size and significance of it. We have seen the importance of the sanctuary as it relates to us personally, parallels ancient Israel, and relates to Revelation. We've laid out an important principle to understand Revelation in one of our previous studies. We've seen many of the prophecies that could easily help a person determine who the Messiah is when he came the first time. And now we want to add to that, but there are a couple of questions that have not yet been asked or answered. To illustrate that, let's consider a wedding invitation. If you were invited to a wedding, what two things would you need to know? When and where, or timing and location. Those two things are crucial for understanding the book of Revelation also. Lack of this information is why many people are lost in the book of Revelation. Many don't know where they are in time or location. Let's think of the book of Revelation as an invitation to a wedding feast. And at every point in the book of Revelation, there's a journey that we're on. We need to know where we are and what time it is. Consider the story of the wise and the foolish virgins. They both fell asleep, therefore lost sight of their location in relation to the groom and bride. So, when they woke up, 5 had oil and 5 didn't. 5 were able to light their lamps and determine their location, and 5 didn't have oil and couldn't light their lamps to determine their location. If you don't know where you are on a map, what are you? You're lost. If you drop your finger anywhere in the book of Revelation, you should be able to determine your location and timing. The way that we determine the location is by the use of the sanctuary. So, looking at a place in Revelation, we ask, am I in the outer court, the holy place, or the most holy place? Once you have your location, the next step is timing. So let's examine that. In the book of Daniel, there are 3 time prophecies. In this study, we will examine the first time prophecy. The other 2, 1260 and the 2300, we will discuss in future studies. With the blueprint of the plan of salvation and possession of Israel, God's chosen people were to prepare the world for the first coming of the Messiah. God led Israel from Egypt to the land of Canaan. You can check Exodus 6 verse 4 for that, where they were to prepare for the first coming of the Messiah. But what happened soon after they had received the sanctuary plans? They tempted and provoked the Most High God and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. Psalms 78 verses 56 to 57. Because of this, God forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hands. Psalms 78 verses 60 to 61. As a result of Israel's continued rebellion through idolatry, God warned, the whole land shall be a desolation, and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Jeremiah 25 verse 11. What did the Lord do next according to 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verses 15 to 16? The Lord sent messengers to his people because he had compassion on them and on his dwelling place. But what did they do? They mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and misused his prophets. 2 Chronicles 36 verses 15 and 16. Therefore, as a result, he brought upon them the king of Babylon, who took all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king, and of his princes, and all these he brought to Babylon. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 18. Then they burnt the house of God, and brake down the walls of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 19. Among those taken captive to Babylon were 4 young Hebrew men named Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel chapter 1, verse 6. One of these young men, Daniel, was used by God as a prophet during this 70-year period of captivity in which the tabernacle and the city of Jerusalem lay in ruin. Daniel was shown that at the end of the 70 years, Babylon would fall to the Medes and the Persians. Daniel chapter 5, verse 28, opening the way for Israel to return to its own land. In fact, King Cyrus of Persia, who overthrew Babylon, made a proclamation or decree in which he wrote, "All the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord God of heaven given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord his God be with him, and let him go up." 2 Chronicles 36, verses 22 to 23. During his time in Babylonian captivity, Daniel also received another vision of warning against Israel. The prophet was shown that Israel was going to be given another period of grace, a period of 70 weeks that were determined upon the people of God. Daniel 9:24. The word determined used in Daniel 9:24 means cut off, allotted to. It meant Israel would have 70 weeks allotted to them to complete the mission God had given them. During this period, what were they to do? They were to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Daniel 9:24. In other words, this time period was given to them to put an end to their rebellious disposition that put them into captivity, and to prepare for the first coming of Christ. The vision also gives a starting point of the prophecy, stating, "Know, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks, a total of 69 weeks. The streets shall be built again, and the wall, and even in troublous times." Daniel 9:25. As we continue our study, we need to understand 3 very important facts. First of all, in the Bible, months consist of 30 days. There's some text here that you can look at to compare. Secondly, in the Bible, year consists of 12 months. Also some text available for that. Thirdly, the time prophecies of Daniel are based upon the principle that a prophetic day is always counted as 1 literal year. You can look at Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6. The preterist and futurist schools of prophetic interpretation admittedly deny the year-day principle. Most preterists interpret the little horn of Daniel 7 as well as the little horn of Daniel 8, which we've not studied yet, but we eventually will, as Antiochus Epiphanes, who lived from 171 to 164 BC, a Macedonian ruler who desecrated the Jewish temple from 167 to 164 BC. Preterists believe that the 3½ years and the 2,300 days are literal time and apply to this period. So for them, it's all in the past. On the other side, most futurists teach that the little horn of Daniel 7 represents a future Antichrist who will sit in a rebuilt Jewish temple for 3½ literal years at the very end of the Christian dispensation. They also believe that the little horn of Daniel 8 represents Antiochus Epiphanes, and that the time prophecy of Daniel are literal time. The common denominator for both systems is that they believe in literal time and not prophetic time. In contrast, historicism has always held that days, weeks, months, and years in a prophetic context should be understood symbolically by applying the year-day or day-year principle. The historic system may be pictured by preterists and futurists as poor, blind, and naked, but by the end of this study, I hope that you will be willing to lay down your preconceived ideas and submit to a biblical approach. In the end, the only ones who will rise from the tombs at the last trump, singing praises to their King, will be those who have submitted themselves and their preconceived ideas fully to Christ. So what we want to know is, what does the Bible say about it? What are some reasons to apply the day for a year principle? As Isaiah 1 verse 18 says, let us reason together. In the book of Daniel, the word days can mean years. Daniel 1 verse 5 refers to 3 years, but in Daniel 1:18, the same period is described as days. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. That's Daniel 1 verse 5. Now, at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel 1:18. The 7 times of Daniel 4:25 as seen above are referred to as days in Daniel 4:34, also notice above. Daniel 5:11 speaks of the days of Nebuchadnezzar. These days were obviously years. Compare Daniel 2 verse 28 and verse 44, where the latter days and the days of these kings mean years. See also Daniel 8:14, verse 26, and 10 verse 14, and 12 verse 13, and 11 verse 20, and 11 verse 33, and the light of Daniel 7 verse 25, and 12 verse 7. In the historical books of the Old Testament, days and years are used in a parallel fashion. Notice the following illustrations. Exodus 13 verse 10 reads literally in the Hebrew that the Passover was to be celebrated from days to days. Obviously, this means from year to year. In 1 Samuel 20 verse 6, in the Hebrew, it reads sacrifice of the days, but in the context clearly we see it refers to the yearly sacrifice. In 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 19 also literally means or reads from days to days. And 1 Samuel 1 verse 21 also literally reads sacrifice of the days. Judges 11:40 literally reads from days to days, for days each year. 1 Samuel 27 verse 7 literally reads days and 4 months. 1 Kings 1:1 says that David was stricken in days, but it means years. Genesis 47 verse 9 is an interesting verse in that Jacob speaks of the days of my years. Genesis 5:5 states that the days that Adam lived were 930 years. Genesis 6:3 is the first time prophecy in the Bible where days are linked with years. You might be thinking, what about Genesis 3:15? I thought that was the first prophecy in the Bible. It was the first prophecy, but it didn't have any specific time, such as days or years. specified yet, like Genesis 6:3. We can also approach this subject from the perspective of the sabbatical and jubilee years. It is obvious that the weekly Sabbath is the foundation for both of these. That is to say, the seventh day of the week becomes symbolic of the seventh year, and the 49 days comes to symbolize the 49 years. Leviticus 25 verses 1 to 7 addresses the sabbatical year. This passage contains the earliest biblical use of the year-day principle. It becomes clear when we compare verse 3 and 4 with verse 5 that the weekly cycle is being used as a pattern for the 7-year period. We have 6 years, which are followed by the 7th year, and the 7th year is one of rest. This agreement is patterned after 6 days of labor, followed by the 7th day, which is a day of rest. Here we clearly have an example of the year-day principle. The same is true of the Jubilee year. See Leviticus 25 verse 8 and compare with Leviticus 23 verse 15. If we accept the testimony of Jesus, the little horn of Daniel 8 cannot represent Antiochus Epiphanes. Jesus made it clear in his days that the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel was still in the future. How could Antiochus, who lived in the 2nd century before Christ, fulfill the prophecy which Jesus clearly indicated was still unfulfilled in his time? You can see Matthew 24 verse 15 and Luke 21 verse 20 on that. Therefore, it must be prophetic years, not literal days, spoken of in Daniel 7 and 8. Furthermore, the little horn of Daniel 7 could not have been fulfilled by Antiochus either, because the Apostle Paul specifies that this horn was still future in his day. See 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 1 to 13. The book of Revelation also places the fulfillment of this prophecy in the future. See Revelation 12 verse 6, verse 14, and chapter 13 verse 5, and chapter 11 verses 1 to 2. Paul is getting his picture of the man of sin, 1 Thessalonians 2 verses 1 to 13, from the little horn of Daniel 7, the little horn of Daniel 8, and the king of the north in Daniel 11. This being the case, the little horn and the king of the north must have ruled for centuries, not for a few literal days. Furthermore, the Apostle Paul makes it absolutely clear that the man of sin was already working in his day, and yet this man of sin will not be destroyed until the second coming of Jesus. How could this be a literal person if he was alive in Paul's days, and yet is not destroyed until Jesus comes the second time? Is this one literal man who has lived for over 2,000 years? The inevitable conclusion is that the man of sin cannot be a literal man, nor can his period of dominion be literal time. Notice again 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 1 to 13. As a rule of thumb, the shorter the time period in apocalyptic prophecy, the more likely it is to be symbolic of a longer time period. For example, is it really possible to fit into one literal week all the events spoken of in the last of the 70 weeks? See Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 and verse 27. We'll do more on this later. Would 10 literal days of persecution during the period of the Smyrna church really be such a terrible ordeal? See Revelation 2, verse 10. Would 3 1/2 literal days be enough to fulfill all the events of Revelation 11? See Revelation 11:9. If the 2 witnesses, the 2 olive trees, the 2 lampstands, the 2 sackcloth, etc., are all symbolic, then why not the time period? Preterists and futurists who apply these prophetic time periods literally encounter serious problems in another sense as well. In the Old Testament, God is presented as the one who reveals the course of human history and provides his divine evaluation of it. There we find a revelation of the continuous and unbroken flow of human history from creation until the first coming of the Messiah. The Gospels then present the story of Jesus' ministry on earth. The book of Acts and the epistles continue the flow by describing the history of the early church. After this is where the preterists encounter serious problems. You see, in the preterist view, there is no revelation from God concerning the entire history of the Christian church. There are almost 2,000 years of silence. According to them, God's description and evaluation of history ended with the Roman emperors in the early church. Truths are not in better shape. According to this school, Revelation 4 to Revelation 18 refers to a short period of human history at the very end of time. Likewise, God's description and evaluation of human history, as found in Daniel, according to this school, ends with the Roman Empire and does not pick up again until the last 7 years of human history. Thus, there is a 2,000-year gap in God's description and evaluation of human history, with the brief exception of the 7 churches. God has been silent about the events of the church for 2,000 years. Only the historicist method is able to reveal a God who is concerned with his church during the entire period of church history, including the period of dominion of the little horn. Only historicism is able to show the providential guidance of God in human history and his loving care for his church during the last 2,000 years. Many Greek scholars understand and taught the year-day principle, but we will limit ourselves to comments which were made by 2 men whose last name is Newton. 3 times and a half, that is, for 1,260 solar years, reckoning as time for a calendar year of 360 days, and a day for a solar year, after which the judgment is to sit, and they shall take away his dominion, not at once, but by degrees, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Sir Isaac Newton, Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of St. John, Part 1, Chapter 8, 114. We must therefore compute the time according to the nature and genius of the prophetic language. A time and times and half a time are 3 years and a half, and the ancient Jewish year consisting of 12 months, and each month of 30 days. A time and times and half a time, or 3 years and a half, are reckoned in Revelation 11, verses 2 and 3, 12, 6, and 14, as equivalent to 42 months, or 1,203 days. And a day in the style of the prophets is a year. I have appointed thee each day for a year, saith God to Ezekiel 4:6. And it is confessed that the 70 weeks in the 9th chapter of Daniel are weeks of years, and consequently 1,260 days are 1,260 years. Bishop Thomas Newton, Dissertations on the Prophecies, London B. Blake, 1840, page 247. Finally, to conclude the study on a day for a year principle, let's first take into consideration what the book of Numbers says. Then we'll look at Ezekiel's comments, since he was one of the prophets taken captive to Babylon or lived during that time. After the number of the days in which ye searched the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. Numbers 14, verse 34. Next, let's go to Ezekiel 4, verse 6. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. The acid test of the year-day principle is whether the events forecasted for the 70 weeks were fulfilled on schedule. So in our next study, we'll find out.